Out of the ash I rise with my red hair. I eat men like air. Good morning and welcome to Lost for Words. I am Sarah Woods. We are still exploring some great women poets, and today continuing the journey into the poetry of Sylvia Plath. Wasn't sure if I was gonna be able to keep trekking through her poetry, just because it's so heavy and so dark, and so some of the ones that she's so well known for, that you sort of get sucked into, have like this feeling of like being in the middle of like this inner war, and also like this like really heavy feeling of like oppression. And so it really is a lot to crawl into her poems and sort of take them on and feel them and try to understand them and feel these little worlds that she's creating for us to experience. And this one, just as dark, just as oppressive, just as like violent and morbid feeling. And what else is it? In this one, she is describing herself. This is called Lady Lazarus. And I don't know if you know the story or not, but Lazarus is someone from the Bible that Jesus raises from the dead. And I went back and looked at that story just very quickly. And what I noticed about that story was Lazarus was, I believe, a friend of Jesus and his friends. And he was sick. And I believe they brought news to Jesus to tell him that Lazarus was sick. And they're like, if you come home, you could heal him. And he doesn't go back right away to go ahead and heal him. He actually ends up waiting until after Lazarus dies to go back. And when he gets there, everyone is really upset. They're like, if you had been here, he wouldn't have died. But Jesus is sort of like, he like weeps with the people, like he feels their emotions or whatever. But he's like, but if I had, then you wouldn't get to see what God's about to do, and you wouldn't get to see God's power. And then he tells Lazarus to come out, and Lazarus, after 4 days in this, tomb, comes out with his, rags on, his cloth, his, like death cloth, like still on him. And so Lazarus lives, and so everybody gets to see the power of God. One thing I think that's really interesting to keep in mind as you read this poem is the theme of power, and whose power is on display in this poem, who is searching for power, who is desperate for power, who doesn't have it, who needs it. So keep that in mind as you read. God, who sent Jesus to earth, and so he is like, he uses that experience to display God's power for resurrection, which is kind of interesting to read that in relation to this poem of Lady Lazarus. So here we go. Let's just go ahead and read it, and then we'll jump right in, okay? It is number 198 in the collected poems of Sylvia Plath. All right. I have done it again. 1 year in every 10, I manage it. A sort of walking miracle. My skin bright as a Nazi lampshade. My right foot a paperweight. My face a featureless fine Jew linen. Peel off the napkin, oh my enemy. Do I terrify? The nose, the eye pits, the full set of teeth, the sour breath will vanish in a day. Soon, soon, the flesh, the grave cave ate will be at home on me, and I, a smiling woman,
I am only 30, and I, like the cat, have 9 times to die. This is number 3. What a trash to annihilate each decade. What a million filaments the peanut-crunching crowd shoves in to see. Them unwrap me hand and foot, the big strip tease. Gentlemen, ladies, these are my hands, my knees. I may be skin and bone, nevertheless, I am the same identical woman. The first time it happened, I was 10. It was an accident. The second time, I meant to last it out and not come back at all. I rocked, shut as a seashell. They had to call and pick the worms off me like sticky pearls. Dying is an art. Like everything else, I do it exceptionally well. I do it so it feels like hell. I do it so it feels real. I guess you could say I have a call. It's easy enough to do it in a cell. It's easy enough to do it and stay put. It's the theatrical. It's the theatrical comeback in broad day to the same place, the same face, the same brute amused shout. A miracle that knocks me out. There is a charge for the eyeing of my scars. There is a charge for the hearing of my heart. It really goes. And there is a charge, a very large charge, for a word or a touch or a bit of blood, or a piece of hair or my clothes. So, Herr Doctor, Herr Enemy, I am your opus. I am your valuable, the pure gold baby that melts to a shriek. I turn and burn. Do not think I underestimate your great concern. Ash, ash, you poke and stir. Flesh, bone, there is nothing there. A cake of soap, a wedding ring, a gold filling. Ere God, ere Lucifer, beware, beware. Out of the ash I rise with my red hair, and I eat men like air.
Okay, so this poem is full of like really intense imagery that is very shocking and very, it sort of like grips you. And it's one of those poems that, because of the way it grips you, I feel like it's actually easy to read it all the way through. There is some poetry that is long that you get into and it's like, oh my gosh, this is so boring. Like, this is full of drama and full of intensity, and it's almost like a train wreck. Like, once you look, like, you can't look away. That's the feeling of this poem. So here we have Sylvia Plath, and she has titled this poem Lady Lazarus. So now we have this female image of Lazarus. So you imagine a tomb, and you imagine, to me it takes me to a biblical scene of Jesus saying, Lazarus, come out, and then you see this man wrapped in all his like grave clothes come walking out, and everybody's like, oh my gosh, this is incredible. And they got to see God's power in this moment. So she's titled it Lady Lazarus. So right now, like, she has given us an image of a female who has come out of her grave. I don't know if you picture her dead in the grave, but for me, I picture her coming out of the tomb. Like, that's the image that comes to my mind when I think of Lazarus. And here she goes. She says, I have done it again, 1 year in every 10 I manage it. That we know, if you've read anything about Sylvia Plath, she accidentally or almost committed suicide when she was like around 10. Then around 20, she attempted suicide and really wanted to die, and she ended up living. And here she says she's done it again, 1 year in every 10. So she's like giving us her track record, like, I've done it again. So she's already done it. We know because of her other poetry, she's already done it twice. And here she's saying to us, at the age of 30, I've done it again. She says, I manage it, a sort of walking miracle. my skin as bright as a Nazi lampshade. Here we go again. These poems of Sylvia Plath, especially at this season in her life, have a very heavy feeling of that, like, Jew, German, Holocaust, oppressive German man, prisoner, you know, she's the Jew who's being shipped off. Like, she is conjuring us, she is bringing us back to that imagery, which she's already done in a couple poems before this, just a few days before this. She said, she is a walking miracle. So here she is, Lady Lazarus, a walking miracle. She is bright as a Nazi lampshade. So I looked up a Nazi lampshade, and that is like an urban legend about this woman. I can't remember what her last name was. I think she was like married to like a German general. So here, you know, the German theme again. And it was rumored that she had, people saw lampshades that she had made from the skins of Jewish people who were victims in the concentration camps. And like, you could see their tattoos on the lampshade. And Sylvia Plath is describing her skin as a Nazi lampshade, which is the thin skin of a Jewish person. And you can almost see the lights on and shining through this Jewish lampshade, the skin. She has made herself a victim of the Nazis again. And she's as bright as a Nazi lampshade. My right foot a paperweight. This line is fascinating to me because I feel like it's just sort of random and doesn't fit with the other stuff that's going on. But okay, so I did just a little bit of research to see if it was possible that paperweights and body parts had anything to do with the Holocaust, and it actually did. I did not know this, but I guess there are stories of parts of people's bodies being filled with sand and used as paperweights. I read one article about a doctor who had tricked some people or a man into an experiment with the hope of release. And this man injected him with poison, which killed him. And then he severed his head and filled it with sand and used it as a paperweight. So this is something possibly that Sylvia Plath knew about when she chose this language to describe her own foot as a paperweight. It is just another possible reference back to the Holocaust and sort of that feeling of being a victim and the devaluing of her body. You go from like this paper thin body to like a foot that is so like heavy that's like weighing her down. So it's like that contrast of feeling. And she says, my face a featureless, fine Jew linen. And so these Jew linens are like what they would wrap a Jewish person in during their burial. And like Jesus was wrapped in this, Lazarus was wrapped in this. And so her body is a Nazi lampshade, the Jewish skin of people turned into a lampshade. Her foot is a paperweight dragging her down, and then her face is featureless, a fine Jew linen. So she's wrapped up in this like death cloth. And then she says, she starts to talk to her audience. Are we her audience? Are men her audience? Is the world her audience? I'm not sure who the audience is, but we're the ones reading it. So She says, "Peel off the napkin, O my enemy. Do I terrify?" So you have this woman, this lady Lazarus, this woman who has been dead for 4 days, and her skin is paper thin, bright as a Nazi lampshade, her foot weighing her down. Her face is wrapped in this death cloth. And she says, "Peel off the napkin, O my enemy." She's like taunting you, like, don't you want to see what's underneath here? And you do, and you peel it off, and she's like, "Do I terrify?" She said, "The nose, the eye pits, the full set of teeth, the sour breath, it'll vanish in a day." And then she's describing this person who has been decaying for 4 days and has been brought back to life. And here she is. So she is like conjuring this Lazarus woman is sort of terrifying. It is not this, like, she's not describing this friend of yours who was sick and died and that you're just missing them. It is like this almost like Frankenstein's monster kind of feel to her. Like there's something very like put together, disjointed, like unhealthy, tragic about her description of herself, like what's underneath this, who is the woman that is this Lazarus. So then she describes her decay, and she's saying, "My sour breath will vanish in a day. Soon, soon, the flesh, the grave cave 8 will be at home on me." So now she takes you back to the cave where she was, and all the flesh that has rotted off of her, she's describing the cave as having eaten it. And she's like, "Don't worry, that'll be back on me soon." So you're imagining all this like rotted flesh, and it's going back and forth between a cave that ate it and her body. And so your brain is sort of like, what is this flesh? Is it like coming back to life, or is it still rotten? Like, you know what I mean? It's messing with your head a little bit about what it looks like. And she says, "And I, a smiling woman." So you have all this terror and all this heaviness and all this decay that is her body, and she is smiling, which I think is fascinating, which is just even creepier, really, to imagine something so morbid, and then she's a smiling woman. So she says, "I am only 30, and like the cat, I have 9 times to die." So for me, this is where she starts to differentiate herself from Lazarus. So Lazarus was brought back to life by Jesus to show God's power. She is now describing herself like a cat. To me, that almost feels like a sentence, or not a curse, but like sort of more of like a fact. Like, you are a cat, so you get 9 lives. So you can die this many times, and no matter what you do, you're going to come back each time until the 9th time. Then you can officially die. So she's like, I'm like a cat. I have 9 lives. So it doesn't matter if I kill myself because I can't die. I'm going to come back. She says, "This is number 3. What a trash to annihilate each decade." So we know that about Sylvia Plath, that twice before that she has accidentally, when she was younger, she tried to take her life, and then like at 10, and then at 20 she really attempted to try to take her life. And she says, "This is number 3. What a trash to annihilate each decade." So you sort of get this idea that like this need to throw away each decade, like that there's something about it. It's like, how tragic is that the whole every 10 years you look back on your life and it's such trash that you can't, it's not even worth keeping. Like, you've got to annihilate it in order to start again and try again the next 10 years. She says, what a million filaments the peanut crunching crowd shoves in to see. I was looking up the word filaments, and I found two different things about this word. And one thing that I found is like a thin string, wiry kind of thing. And it can have a relation to light bulbs, something that helps light bulbs. And then it can also, a filament can be, I think, part of the protein strains that help build a cell. So our body is made up of like 30 trillion cells, I believe, is what I found out when I looked it up online. So either way with this, if you say, what a million filaments, and you imagine a million lights coming on, or you imagine what a million filaments, and you imagine her body, all these cells coming back together. Either way, that sort of works here. She says, what a million filaments the peanut crunching crowd shoves in to see. So I'm thinking maybe she might be talking about her body. So now you have, when you think of a peanut crunching crowd, you think of people at like a circus, where they like are able to eat it and throw it on the ground. And they're just there for the amusement and the entertainment. And but they're there to see her body is what I'm imagining. So what a million filaments. You imagine all the filaments that are building all the cells in her body. And she's got this crowd of people with their peanuts there to see the miracle that is her body, like what has happened. And she says, they shove in to see them, the peanut crunching crowd shoves in to see them unwrap me hand and foot. I never really thought about the them right there, like who the them is that's unwrapping her. But somebody is unwrapping her. She says, they shove in to see them unwrap me hand and foot. The big strip tease, gentlemen, ladies. These are my hands. These are my knees. To me, that line right there is so disturbing. Like the whole idea of like the way she described the terror and the war zone that is her body, the decay, the Nazi lampshade, the sour breath. They're all there to see, and it's like they're excited to watch her unwrap her, to be unwrapped. She calls it a striptease. So she takes this thing, this dead woman, and people being there to watch her. She takes something that's supposed to be sensual, and like a striptease that's supposed to turn people on and like arouse you, and she turns this feeling of unwrapping a dead woman into something. She ties it together with something that is supposed to be erotic and sensual, but it's not. Like, it's terrible. Yeah, it's so creepy. Like the way she describes it, they unwrap me hand and foot. The big strip tease, gentlemen, ladies. These are my hands. These are my knees. Except she's giving us parts of her body that are like very like not the most erotic part of your body. Her hands, her knees. But it's just very weird to try to create erotic language around a woman that is that fresh with decay, if that makes any sense. She says, I may be skin and bones, but nevertheless, I am the same identical woman. The first time it happened, I was 10. It was an accident. The second time, I meant to last it out and not come back at all. So it's kind of weird because obviously she's Lady Lazarus, so she has died and she has come back and she is being unwrapped for this crowd of people's entertainment to watch and see what's underneath. And she's like, I may be skin and bone. She's like, I may be all that, like completely like nothing almost. She's like, but I'm the same identical woman. Like, I've been resurrected, but I'm still the same person. Like, that, which is kind of ironic. You would think like the feeling of being resurrected, you would hope to be a new person, if that makes any sense. Or not a new person, but a newer, better person, maybe. But she says, I'm the same identical woman. First time it happened, I was 10. It was an accident. The second time, I was meant to last it out and not come back at all. I rocked shut as a sheet. I rocked shut as a sheet. Try to say that like 30 times. I rocked shut as a seashell. So you imagine this. She's talking about her suicide attempts. And the first time when she was young, the second time she describes it as rocking shut as a seashell. So that's like a seashell that hasn't been opened. So you imagine her like curling up. And she's like, they had to call and pick the worms off of me like sticky pearls. She said, dying is an art like everything else. I do it exceptionally well. I do it so it feels like hell. I do it so it feels real. I guess you could say I have a call. So it's interesting to think about Lazarus, if like, was that his call too? Because he died. Jesus let him die without healing him and then raised him from the dead to show his power, or to show God's glory and his power. So Sylvia Plath is almost like, she's like, dying is an art like everything else. She says, I guess you could say I have a call. It's like the one thing she does really well, is what she's sort of saying right here. It's easy enough to do it in a cell. It's easy enough to do it and stay put. It's the theatrical comeback in broad day to the same place, the same face, the same brute, amused shout, a miracle. So she's saying anybody can die, like anybody can go die, but who can die and then come back so theatrically, like Lazarus? Like, that's how she sees herself. She's like, I can come back in broad day. Like, it's not just like a quiet waking up. It's this very like theatrical experience. To the same place, to the same face, the same brute. There's a repetitiveness right there that's sort of like, ugh, like I've done it, that, like how the beginning starts. I've done it again. To the same place, the same face, the same brute, amused shout, a miracle. And you can see everybody shouting, oh, it's a miracle, you're alive. And which is very ironic and weird to say about a woman who's standing in front of you, who has just described her skin like a Nazi lampshade, her foot a paperweight, and her like she's still decaying, you know? It's a miracle. Sure, it's a miracle. But she said, that knocks me out, that shout. She says it knocks her out. And she says, there is a charge for the eyeing of my scars. There is a charge for the hearing of my heart. It really goes. I really, really love this line. I actually almost missed it the first time I read it. But she has just gone through great lengths to show us the war zone that is her body, the decay that is her body, and its atrociousness. But now she is saying that she would charge for the hearing of her heart. And she says it really goes. So it's sort of this idea like, you look at me and you don't think I have a heart, but I really do, and it really works. And there is a charge, a very large charge, for a word or a touch or a bit of blood or a piece of my hair or my clothes. So she's like, okay, well, at the circus, you've got to pay to get into the circus if you want to see these people that, like, you go to the state fair or the circus and you pay to go see these people who are oddities and who are freaks and who are, whatever. And it's more for your own amusement. It's not, that becomes that person's purpose, is to be there for your amusement, sort of. But she's like, yes, if you want some of my hair, if you want some of my blood, if you want to hear me speak, if you want anything you want from me, you're going to have to pay for it. This isn't free. And if we're going to be a circus, you're going to have to pay for this. And then she says, this part is fascinating to me. She says, or this next section. So then she says, so, Herr Doctor, Herr Enemy. Herr is Herr, and it's a German word for Mr., or it's a label for a German man. And she's using it for her doctor, her enemy. And we already know that from her past poetry that when Sylvia Plath starts relating people to the Germans, that she is relating that person to somebody who wants to destroy her, because she's always relating herself to the Jewish person. And she says, so, Herr Doctor, Herr Enemy. She's talking to her doctor. She said, I am your opus. I am your valuable, the pure gold baby that melts to a shriek. And she's saying to her doctor, she's like, I am your great work. Because your opus is, the opus, I think when people use that word, a lot of times they use it with like a composer's musical composition. So she's talking to her doctor and she's like, I am your great musical composition. Like, you have created me. I am your pure gold baby that melts down to a shriek. So you imagine a song, or I do, I imagine this like doctor creating this like piece of music, and all of a sudden this like great work that he's making, his golden child, melts into a scream. And like that, most composers probably, that wouldn't be like how they would want the end to, that's not the ending they would choose for their great work, maybe. And she says, do not, that pure gold baby that melts to a shriek, I turn and I burn. And she says, do not think I underestimate your great concern. So now Sylvia Plath, she has turned from the doctor, from the audience, and she is burning. She is a fire, she is a flame. And she's like, don't think I underestimate your great concern. I understand you're very concerned right now, but it's okay. Don't worry. I haven't ruined your great opus. She says, ash, ash, you poke and you stir. So you start to imagine you imagine Sylvia Plath and you imagine this Lazarus woman. Like we have gone from Lazarus coming out of a cave and, this description of her. Then we've come to the show, the circus. And now we have watched Sylvia Plath burst into flames, and all that is left of her is her ashes. And in this pile of ashes, the people stand and they poke around and they're looking, and all that's left is a cake of soap, a wedding ring, and a gold filling. And what's interesting about the cake of soap is there are horror stories about World War II of them using the fat from the burned bodies of the people in the concentration camps being used to make soap. So, that's really morbid. So that's something that's what's left, is that soap, a wedding ring, and a gold filling, from her tooth. That's for me, that image is like, whoa, like that's very powerful. To come back from the dead, be the circus, and then all of a sudden you're like, whew, like you're burnt to the ground, ashes, and people are poking through, and there's nothing left of you except some soap, a wedding ring, and a gold filling. Then she says, ere God, ere Lucifer, beware, beware. To me, this line is like it gives me, I don't know if it gives me chills, but it's like, oh God, like, okay, she's bringing God and the devil into this. And it's fascinating. Okay, so like in all of her poems, not all of her poems, but in a lot of these poems, like Daddy, the Jailer, there was another one. This one, this use of the German, she pushes on to, they are men, they are her father, they are her husband, and they are oppressing her. They are out for her destruction. And that's what we've seen so far with her use of these German labels. They're the German, she's the Jew. So to me, like this part is like, whoa. So we've gone from her father, her husband, her doctor, and now God and Satan and Lucifer. She says, ere God, ere Lucifer. So now God is a German and the devil is a German. And it feels like, it has this feeling to me that men are like, now it's like it has grown so much from just her father. Now it feels like men, from her father to her husband to God and the devil and her doctor, like men, the world of men are just there to destroy Sylvia Plath. And I'm like, that is like, that's heavy. That's a very heavy perspective. But she's telling, the thing that's fascinating about that is like there are little girls out there. I mean, usually with the devil, like you don't think of the devil as being somebody who's out to help you. But there are tons of little girls out there who like pray to God every night, and they like get on their knees and they think God loves them. They sing Jesus loves me. And then there are tons of little girls that are daddy's little girls that like run to greet their dads when he gets home, and they go fishing with him, and they do whatever, he throws them in the air, he plays with them on the ground, reads them stories, takes them driving, like does all those like fatherly things. So you have that like ideal father image, and then you have Sylvia Plath's father image, which is like this tyrant, oppressive man that wants to just is like sucking all the air out of her life, is the black sky in her life. He's so oppressive, he's turned her sky black. And then her husband comes along and joins him, and he feels the same to Sylvia Plath. And now we have God and the devil, who are just more men that feel the same. I find that very fascinating, that her perspective of men has gathered all these male personalities, and this is her vision of them. And to me, that's like terrifying, to live in a world that feels that against you. Like that would be awful. Like I can't imagine that feeling. But she says, ere God, ere Lucifer, beware, beware. So she is talking to God and she is talking to the devil, and she's like, watch out, beware. I'm like, what does God need to be aware of? What does the devil need to be aware of? Like when you think of the two most powerful forces in the world. They're God and the devil. And they're both men, have male like identities anyway, usually. Or they do in lots of world religions. I mean, I know there's all kinds of other stuff out there, but Sylvia Plath, male. She says, beware. Out of the ash I rise with my red hair, and I eat men like air. So the end of this, they are poking through the ashes, trying to find her, and there is nothing there except a wedding ring, gold filling, and some soap. And then she says, oh God, oh devil, beware. Out of the ash I rise with my red hair. So all of a sudden you get this vision of a phoenix, which is the bird that in its destruction is reborn after its destruction. And I looked up the meaning associated with a phoenix, which is the red. Usually it's a phoenix. I think it has red associated with it. It says the symbol of the phoenix is to emerge from catastrophe, smarter, stronger, and more powerful. So I think this is fascinating that she has gone from Lazarus to the circus to being burnt to the ground, and now she's telling God and the devil, watch out. And here she comes rising out of the ash with her red hair, this phoenix. She's smarter, stronger, and more powerful. And it almost like gives you that feeling like, okay, she's risen and she's stronger, more powerful, smarter. Is she saying she's stronger than God, stronger than the devil? Like, I don't know. But the last sentence is, I eat men like air, which is fascinating, like if you think about it, because her father was a man, her husband was a man, God is a man, her doctor's a man, and the devil has a masculine identity. And she says, I eat men like air. So is it like all, like, is she like warning them, like, I'll eat you, like I'm coming back and I will consume you? I think that's fascinating, and very like brazen and bold, and it has that sense of feeling of being so oppressed and so held down that it's like you have to talk so much bigger than you really are in order to be like, to get your power back. Like you can feel her trying desperately to feel like she has some sense of power, some sense of control, and it's men that have taken that feeling from her, and which is crazy. Something I think is interesting to think about is the only way for someone who is feeling held down and oppressed and tortured by someone or a group of people, is the only way for them to find a sense of control and power over themselves is to come back and pendulum swing and dominate the other person. I think that's something interesting to think about, because I feel like that's what's happened in this poem, that she's gone from being the victim to the oppressor. But the last sentence, I eat men like air. To me, I feel like that sentence completely, I feel like she meant it to be a thing of strength. But for me, it actually, when I read it, I see her weakness. I feel like she's trying to say that men are nothing to her, that they're dispensable as air, like she can consume them that easily. But air is not dispensable. Air is everything.
We cannot live without air. We cannot breathe without air. We cannot exist without air.
Because she says, I eat men like air. Who eats air? Like when you're hungry, you don't eat air. When do you consume air? When you're breathing. Like breathing is something that you do involuntarily, like you can't help, and you need it in order to live. If you stop breathing, you die. And so this last line for me is sort of like, oh wow, like she is so oppressed, or you get this feeling of being so oppressed by men, but at the same time when she rises up again, but there's still that need for men to even exist. I'm very curious if you can see that in that last sentence, like the need she still has. She has risen up and she's like, beware, I eat men like air. Which is like, it is terrifying, maybe from the man's perspective, like, oh, she's coming for me, she'll devour me. But at the same time, it's also like, for me, I'm like sad about it. Like it makes me sad because I'm like, oh, she's risen up, but it's not into her like a strength that doesn't need them. It's she's risen up, and it's like she still has that like attachment, that bond that like needs men in order to exist or breathe, which I find very interesting. And it makes me feel like, okay, we still haven't gotten anywhere. Or it makes me feel like, okay, the cycle has started over again. It's just another cycle. Another 10 years has started, and she will pursue some man and consume him like air, and then he will leave her, and this will happen again. For me, that is how I feel when I read this, is, okay, you've risen out of the ash, but now you're just going straight back into your cycle again. This doesn't feel as much like she's been being happened to in this poem. She's like, it has that feeling of like, men are always happening to me. And okay, I got to make that stop. Let me burn myself to the ground and I'll start again. Just very interesting. So this poem makes me think of a short story. And this short story is not dark, morbid like this, but it's sad. It's about a woman. It's from a short story by Anton Chekhov. He's a Russian writer, and he wrote, I think he was really famous for his short stories. But he has this one short story. It's called The Darling. And it's about this woman who gets married to one man. And it's been a while since I've read it, so I can't remember at all what these men's hobbies or professions were. But like, she gets married to this one man, and his profession, will just make it up and say, okay, he loved building houses. And so because she married him, she gets completely consumed by his life, and she starts to know everything about building houses. And she is like, everybody knows her, and she can talk about her husband's life like it's her life. Then he dies. When he dies, she becomes this like empty shell, and she has nothing, and she becomes depressed. Then she marries again, and say this time she marries a clockmaker or something. And now that she's married this man with this passion, she starts to know everything there is to know about his passion, and she can talk about it to length's end with the same kind of passion that her husband does. Then he dies, and she returns to nothingness and has nothing to be passionate about again. And is sort of like a shell again. And then I think it happens with the third husband, and then he dies, and then they had a child together, and then she does it with her child. But to me, there's something about that story that reminds me of Lady Lazarus, and that feeling of, it's like, it's not the same at all as far as the feeling of oppressiveness that men bring to her life, but it's that same sense of like, she comes alive because a man comes into her life, and she like becomes something, and then he is gone and she deflates and she's nothing. And then a man comes into her life and she inflates and she's something. He's gone, she deflates and she's nothing. It's like she's having to find her sustenance, her passion for life, her energy for life in these men. Sylvia Plath is a lot different than that, because she had a passion, like she was, she pursued education, she had a passion for poetry, like she was a very intelligent woman who had her own things that she was pursuing before she came up against Ted Hughes. But I do get that same sense of like there being this desperate need in her for that male energy in order for her to come to life, which I think is really interesting. And it's sad because Lady Lazarus, I feel like it's so sad because like she feels the need, she writes about this need to like burn herself up and start over again. And we see that in a couple of months she will take her life, but this time, like, she doesn't come back. She doesn't get her third life. She's not a cat. She is not Lady Lazarus. She does not come back again and she doesn't get to be the circus again. She doesn't get to be the phoenix. I think that's all I have to say about this one. But I will say, the farther I go into her poetry and the more I like let myself read it and try not to take it on myself too much, I am really appreciating her skill for writing. Her skill for writing. She really is like an amazing writer, and she really has such an incredible ability to describe things and bring images to life in your head, and to show you, she really does give you her perspective or her vision. Like she really is able to like communicate that so that we can step into her world and see through her eyes, and that's really, really an incredible skill. She's amazing, because there's people who write poetry out there who write and write and write and write, and you can try to step into their poetry and feel it, and it's really hard to feel their poetry. It feels dull and boring, and Sylvia Plath is not like that. Like she really is able to, it's like a strange morbid life that she's able to give to her poems. Very much like a Frankenstein's monster kind of feel. Because I think she has a poem where she talks about her poems not being able to bring them to life. And now that I think about that, I think that's very interesting that she wrote that. Because I feel like she does bring them to life, but they don't feel like a thriving, living, energetic human full of life. Her poems have that Frankenstein's monster feel to them, like this haphazardly put together creature that is terrifying to look at and barely knows how to function in the world. Like, I don't know. Yeah, her poems have that feeling to them, to me. Anyway, thank you so much for joining me. I have really enjoyed going through this poem today. I hope you all have a great week, and I will see you again next time.